Sorry about the delay, and it looks like my Apple Keynote file has slightly corrupted, so everything's nice and warped. Great start. Okay, I'm Vinko. Just before we start, the not generic, but the obligatory acknowledgement to the original owners of the land from one Indigenous person to another. I hope the rivers run clear, the land is returned, and your voices are actually heard. Before we go any further with this, a small content warning. This really is blown out. This talk will contain discussions of racism, extremist ideology, strong and confronting language, a brief discussion of eugenics and genocide, experience, erasure, and people on the internet. So you have been warned. And also further disclaimer, we're going to be talking about some specific modern socio-ethnic groups, of which I am not a member. I do not claim to speak for anyone amongst those groups. So I'm doing my best to use the words of people in those communities to allow them to speak for themselves. All right, so dreadlocks, why are we here? Anybody have like a forward summary of what a dreadlock is? Want to throw out? No? No? Okay. Dreadlocks, I've got most people probably immediately jump to Bob Marley, as you can see here. Dreadlocks are, depending on the definition, generally a hairstyle in which the hair is allowed to grow without combing and forms matted locks. Or more specifically, these are tight tangles, spirals that begin, the tangling begins straight out of the scalp, and they form naturally. They can be adorned, although not always. A brief note about hair types. So it may not be particularly clear from this image, but there are, within the now currently accepted standardized 4 main hair types, which go from sort of flat, you don't have any curls, I won't say boring, but you're just dead straight. Type 1 through various levels of curvy, wavy, and then into sort of hair that naturally coils. The hair types that are most prone to naturally forming dread-like coils, these types here, type 4B and type 4C. Type 4A tends to be a bit more delicate. But it's notable that these hair types, largely though not always, conform to ethnicity and genetics. A survey done in 2016 2019 found that 75% of surveyed African Americans had hair types that fell within type 4B and 4C. So there's a little bit of genetics at play here. Why? So basic definition of a dreadlock, tight, coiled, spring-like locks or mats of hair that form naturally out of the scalp. Where do these come from? Now, dreadlocks as a style, there's a lot of debate, both on the internet and in the academic literature. There's generally sort of 3 schools of thought on the origins of what we would call the modern style of locks or dreadlocks. The first is that they come out of Central Africa, so from the Maasai and Mau Mau tribes. The second is that they may have originated with a very niche set of Hindu priests in the 6th century CE. And the third, which is the one that I'm going to focus on here today, is that of the communities of Afro-Caribbeans and Afro-Americans, so in the Americas and the Caribbean. What's interesting, particularly with the Caribbean sort of school of the origin, is that the hairstyle is tightly associated with the experience of being a person of color in the Americas. There are elements of religion, ethnic identity, and also a good strong dose of colonialism. I've got two extracts here from Derek Chauvinist's excellent work, who sort of, I think, is the most authoritative, cohesive sort of study of the early years of the hairstyle being adopted. The first here is an account of a man called Bagawaya, basically, who was a follower of one of the early Rastafarian movers and shakers in Jamaica. He crossed him at some point, Marcus Garvey, and supposedly a curse was put on Bagawaya, as you can see here, basically saying that he can never go inside, he's going to have to live in burlap sacks, and he can't ever wash, and he's going to be outcast from society. Now this set Bagawaya apart. He was looked down and very much stigmatized both by the Afro-Caribbean, the Black Jamaican community, and the British sort of colonial, establishment. Some other groups would later see this and embrace it. So the Rastafari, of course, as we saw with Bob Marley, this becomes quite a significant or synonymous hairstyle with that set of belief systems. And this brief, very interesting preparation for a duty being a reference to, I guess, a mission if you were a North American Pentecostal or something. There's an association within the cities with Rastafari, the dreadlock hairstyle, and being dirty or outside of society. Okay, so there's an experience there of being othered. A few later in the particularly 60s and 70s, when the Return to Africa movement really took off, particularly in the Caribbean, a number of, not extremists, but more revolutionary groups, such as the Youth Blackface and the Dreadfuls, who were named for the dreadlock hairstyle, they actively sought to cultivate and use this hairstyle as a means of consciously removing themselves from society. They don't want to be part of the push to assimilate into British Jamaica and then the early independent Jamaica, which is still very much caught in the rigmaroles of the expectations of British colonialism, particularly in dress. You want to, even if you're not European, you want to look as much like a European as you can, because that makes you look civilized. But these groups actively rejected that. And of course, hairstyle and race or the experience of certain ethnicities are tightly bound here. We've got another example from Jamaica. Following the independence, push for independence in Jamaica, they began to hold yearly pageants, which was sort of just an excuse not an excuse, but a elaborate attempt to show off the progress of assimilation in post-colonial Jamaica. There were 10 types, and I've only listed a couple of them here, but they went everything from Miss Apple Blossom, which was a category for white Europeans, all the way through to the not at all ethnicizing Miss Allspice and Miss Ebony. Then if you jump forward into the modern day, there is still significant amounts of stigma with hairstyles that are favored by or just grow naturally within certain communities. Main example being currently in the US and even back home in New Zealand, and I assume here as well, certain hairstyles are banned because they are associated with untidiness, unruliness, unwillingness to conform. Okay, so a bit loaded. And this is actually a brilliant scholar, Judith Locate, who's a German but of African descent, parents were born, I believe, in Nigeria. Did a series of interviews with young German women with African roots, and more often than not, the reaction to their natural hairstyles defined their experience within their adopted homes. So, for instance, here we have another Judith, not the interviewer Judith, really points out that she had this feeling you wanted to be part of it. We always determined who was the prettiest of the evening before we went up, right? It was never me. So yes, because of that, and my hair would always drive me mad. It was such a huge part of who I am. And this is a pretty widely or pretty common lived experience for people with hair types that aren't from type 1 through to type 3. Yeah. Is this making sense so far? Yeah, cool, okay. This is where we get into the rough stuff. So why is this an issue, and why the hell am I standing here talking to you about it? Well, if you dive into the deep, nasty bowels of the internet, you'll find a lot of, shall we say, impassioned discourse on lots of things, but in this case specifically, Locs. I'm going to use the term Locs because it's more commonly used in communities we've spoken about. So there's a fine line between assimilation and appropriation, neither of which are good. We've established that Locs are very much tied with certain ethnic and cultural experiences. People who don't belong to those communities often like their hairstyle and adopt it themselves for aesthetic purposes. It's not for me to say whether that's right or wrong, but where it does start to cross the line is when we get into these very bizarre niche revisionist arguments, such as the wonderful one you're about to hear.
Now, if you're talking about Locs, I've already shown in my video series yesterday that the earliest depiction of Locs that we have is from the Minoan culture that settled Europe. So let me ask, did you appropriate white culture? Because Minoans were specifically Greek and were Europeans. Are you telling me that I'm not allowed to protect my hair with proper protection materials? Or what?
So there's a bit to unpack there. First and foremost is this, the statement that dreadlocks were worn by the Minoans, which until I encountered this, I'd not thought of or heard of. As we'll see, this is not a fringe. Shut up. Not a fringe. Fringe argument, and we've got a nice selection here. The names have been blurred to protect the guilty, although I did delete the historical ninja and ninjutsu society and warfare page up there because it's one of my favorites. The Minoan or the Theron frescoes constantly come up again and again and again as an example of an ethnic group of non-African origin having dreadlocks, but more specifically, the association or the assumption that the Minoans were Europeans in the sense that we think of a white European today. From what I have been able to make of the logic is the Minoans lived in the Aegean. The Aegean is Greece. The ancient Greeks were early Greeks. Modern Greeks are European, and therefore they're white. Therefore, it's okay to appropriate these things. Where did they get this from? It's just bizarre. Well, everyone's favorite authoritative source for everything. Most of these arguments I've been able to trace back to one really dodgy footnote in the Wikipedia article. Of course, this is the extended actual direct quote from the source. again, it's only in passing. The boxing children were with dreadlocks and other coloured fishermen. Things to note here, of course, picking it apart. Christos Domar was not the discoverer of Akrotiri and Thera. The first excavator was Spiridion Marianatos. Domar took over from him when he retired. But this is all stemming from this one article. So where the hell did they get this citation, which, by the way, does not exist in any of Domar's publications? It could be a misquote from the original excavation report by Marianatos, but I have been unable to track that down, regardless of how much begging I do at the interloan section of the library. So, okay, let's go directly to the evidence. Is there evidence, or what is this evidence they're citing of Locs and the Aegean, specifically from Thera? Well, all roads don't go to Rome, they go to the boxing boys fresco. Has anyone seen this in the flesh? Yep. Your impression? Yeah, just like impressive or no? I thought it was impressive. It's just one of the things that we're, once I pointed out, a few people I've pointed it out to, and then they've wound up in the NAM and looked a bit closer at it and gone, that doesn't quite fit. There are a slightly smaller than life-size fresco of two boxing boys or pugilistas. A few different interpretations of who or what they might be. Marianatos was convinced that they were young princes. There's not really anything pointing to that. It could be ritual fighting. It could just be young lads beating the snot out of each other. What I want to hone in on here is the hair. So they've got this quite interesting hairstyle. They have a blue scalp and these long tresses at the back and tight curling forelocks at the front. As you said, the frescoes are quite fragmentary. There's a lot of artistic license done, or informed artistic license with the restorations. The blue of the scalp, there have been a few different theories. The original was that it was a type of dye. Now the main theory is that it's representative of a very closely cropped, shaved hair. So if you've ever had a number 0, it's usually associated, at least on Thera, with youthful or young people. If we remember back to the typology of the hair types, so types 4B and C, which reference type coiling, if we get a bit of a closer look at the what remains of the fragments, we can see that there's not really evidence of coiling, and granted, this could be a limitation of the artistic medium. However, if we zoom in on the preserved free mottled ends, you can see the at the end strands of hair. Sorry, I'm losing my words. The strands are not bunched, they're not coiled, they're free hanging, they're not split ends, but it's almost like a if not a braid, it's a long form of ponytail or a tightened hair. I don't believe that what we can see, at least in figure A, conforms to either the types of hair that naturally are predisposed to forming locks, or indeed are the sort of cultivated locks that people with hair types 1 through 3, the process they have to go through to try and make and maintain dreadlocks. The forelocks, likewise, also just seem to be large curls. They're unadorned, but again, you can see that there's splitting on the ends of the forelocks. The other figure, reconstructed at the bottom, but again, the forelocks here is slightly easier to see that there's the splitting at the end. It's almost like a big coif, Tintin, but Theron. What about the rest of the Theron canon? I've just included a brief selection here that I'll blow through quickly. The Naked Boys fresco, don't Google that on your work computer. Again, they exhibit the blue, closely shaved or cropped scalp. And again, we have this almost a high ponytail. And even with the fragmentation and partial obliteration, you can see that we do have individual looking strands of hair or clusters of hair. Damn, I've had 20. Okay. Likewise, the other youthful figures in the Theron frescoes are much the same. This younger saffron gatherer, again, probably the best example of this long tress of hair splitting at the end. And just very quickly in closing, what I've been trying to do is work out a typology or a matrix of hairstyles in the Southern Aegean, because for the life of me, I cannot find, or I don't think anyone has attempted a cohesive overview study of hair and hair types, hairstyles and their meanings within the Aegean and the Bronze Age. So this is my initial attempts at creating one. And so basically we've got A is an example of the modern dreadlock. And then as we go down, B1 and 2 are the blue scalp shaved. C through to D, we've got the long and short, dressed and undressed. So figures who have adornments. The mistress of animals, for example, has very elaborate hair, a lot of adornments. She'll be an example of type E2. Brief examples, the Minoan mullet, which I'm attempting myself at the moment. I should have actually put in a serious picture. It's best demonstrated by the leader of the procession on the boxer right on. If we just look or do a survey of all of the figures in the frescoes, both the large scenes and the miniature frescoes, or the panoramic scenes at Akrotiri, our hair types break down like this. So there's nothing I can find that would conform to type A. The most common are the B2 type, so that's short, partially adorned, shaved scalps. The main shortcoming with the study, currently as it is I haven't quite gotten through all of the other many figural depictions, but a brief survey of the corpus of Minoan seals also doesn't contain anything that I would categorize as a type A. It seems that what people are viewing as dreadlocks are in fact short adorned styles, not coiled hair types. Locs or not. Let's just be honest. I can see the logic in why you might go, oh, they look like dreadlocks, and it's easy to run with that terminology when there's a single reference that uses the term. But the evidence just isn't there. Why do we care? This feeds back into a longer legacy of racism, or racism and racial bias in archaeology, which has been this sort of since the beginning. And I'm going to pick on Arthur Evans here because he's the most pertinent and influential. There's a rather horrific deal of ethnicizing. Evans has a hierarchy of ethnicities. It's quite interesting, though. He sees people of African descent or darker descent as being less civilized. However, he does argue at some point that there is some influence upon Crete that's positive from sub-Saharan Africa, but it's filtered through places like Egypt, which he describes as being Mediterranean types, so not African. They're just Greeks who live on the other side of the sea. And with that assumption that, this is the Minoans are the starting point of European civilization. I have a strong point of contention with that. You can kind of see how the line of logic and the video and the posts we've looked at runs. It's this ongoing legacy of appropriation, misappropriation, revisionism, and ultimately erasure. And I'll leave you on this quite sharp quote from Emma Wilson's excellent article. Thank you, and sorry if that was a bit of a bummer.
Thank you, Vinko, for a thoughtful paper. One question, and then, because it's almost lunchtime.
Sorry.